Hello and welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, hi, you are very welcome. This is Reading the Past and I'm Dr. Cat. On the 3rd of March 1943, a tragedy occurred in East London that has been described as one of the worst civilian disasters of World War II. What made it, indeed makes it, all the more shocking is that the loss of life in this case was not the direct result of enemy action. Today, we're taking a look at the Bethnal Green Tube Disaster. The event we're going to look at today is one that I feel somewhat connected to, albeit in a non-direct and certainly tangential way. As I've mentioned on many occasions on this channel, I am raising my family in East London, and among other things, that does mean that I have used, and will continue to use Bethnal Green Tube Station. On top of this, I love this part of London, and I love it for many reasons. But as a person who is fascinated by history, the East End of London, I think, is a particularly rich source of interesting people and events from the past to look at and to talk about. I have spoken about some of them already on this channel. Indeed, I think it's high time for me to make an East London playlist, which I'm going to do, and I'm going to add this video to that playlist and then link it in the description. But I think the other reason that I feel a sense of connection to this event is because, as a child, I spent a lot of time with my maternal grandparents. My papa also loved history. He took me to all sorts of heritage sites. He taught me all about the Tudors, but he also taught me about World War II, which, of course, wasn't really history for him, as he spent the war as part of the Home Guard in North London. My nana was some years younger than him, and she was also living in North London as well. And as a side note, my grandparents would discover, through a much later conversation, that they had in fact met when my nana was in her early teens. As the story goes, a German shell had landed, I believe they said, on some power lines. That shell had not detonated, and so the Home Guard arrived to assess the situation from a nearby garden. That garden was the one that was attached to the home that my nana lived in with her parents. My great-grandparents owned and ran a fish and chip shop in North London. And due to her age, my nana was evacuated from London. But according to her, she wasn't particularly keen on where she was sent to, so she decided it was best for her to skip out and make her way back home. My great-grandfather was apparently of the opinion that since she was there, she should make herself useful. So she told me that when the air raid sirens began to sound, my great-grandfather would make himself busy, parcelling up meals of fish and chips to put in a crate, to cover with one of his white coats, and then to give to my nana so that she could be sent off to the local underground station so she could sell those packets of fish and chips to the people sheltering down there. Nana told me that on occasion bombs would be falling close enough to where she was that white coat would be blown off of the crate she was carrying. It's pretty terrifying. Or at least it was and is to me, because my nana seemed to find the whole thing quite amusing. The events we're looking at today bring home to me yet another way that my nana's wartime escapades, and believe me, there were a few, could have gone badly wrong. If she had simply been sent to sell fish and chips at a tube station in East London, rather than the one she was sent to in North London. The aerial bombing campaign known as the Blitz, which is a word that comes from the German term Blitzkrieg, which itself means lightning war, began in September 1940 and continued through until May 1941. During these months, more than 43,500 civilian lives were lost. The bombers targeted towns and cities all over Britain. However, as the website of the Imperial War Museum explains, quote, London was bombed more heavily and more often than anywhere else in Britain. The website states that, quote, the Blitz began on the 7th of September, Black Saturday, when German bombers attacked London, leaving 430 dead and 1,600 injured. London was then bombed for 57 consecutive nights, and often during the daytime too. London experienced regular attacks, and on the 10th to the 11th of May 1941 was hit by its biggest raid. German bombers dropped 711 tons of high explosive and 2,393 incendiaries. 1,436 civilians were killed. However, this proved to be the last major raid until January 1943. The disaster at Bethnal Green would take place just over 2 months after this major raid of January 1943. However, years before, in anticipation of the hostilities that would ultimately materialise, some British householders with the space and the will to do so installed air raid shelters on their properties. Towards the end of 1938, the Prime Minister, Neville Chamberlain, tasked Sir John Anderson with taking charge of air raid precautions. Anderson led the Ministry of Home Security, and he commissioned the design of a shelter for private domestic use in people's gardens. The resulting products were known as Anderson air raid shelters in honour of Sir John. The custodians of an existing Anderson shelter near Vauxhall point out that, quote, the first was installed in a garden in Islington, London, on the 25th of February 1939, and between then and the outbreak of war in September, around 1.5 million shelters were distributed to people living in areas expected to be bombed by the Luftwaffe. During the war, a further 2.1 million were erected. They were designed to be placed into the ground and then covered with earth. There were, though, other domestic options for shelter. Some used pre-existing basements. Some hid under their stairs. There was also the Morrison indoor shelter that had the benefit of doubling up as a family dining table. Some streets had communal shelters built for the purpose of defence, while open spaces like parks often played host to so-called trench shelters for those who found themselves nearby when the air raid sirens sounded. Londoners, though, had another option: the subterranean cocoon of the various tube stations. And the use of tube stations was not a new idea. Indeed, it was arguably an established plan. Because, as Sarah Castagnetti, the National Archives visual collection specialist, reminds us, quote, tube stations had already been used as shelters during the First World War. However, by the time the British government was preparing for the next conflict, concern was being expressed by those in power about the potential risk of overcrowding in the underground stations that lacked options for proper sanitation and, in many cases, ventilation. The government was worried that these stations might become breeding grounds for illness, and also perhaps for discontent and dissatisfaction. Additionally, potentially blocking up these stations might, they thought, prove detrimental to the war effort, should they be needed to move troops and supplies. Castagnetti explains, quote, initially, entrances to stations were blocked once air raids began, but very quickly the authorities relented, and from 4 p.m, people were allowed to start settling down for the evening on the platforms. Chemical toilets were provided, along with first aid and canteen facilities, and in some stations, bunks were fitted. With trains running till 10:30 p.m, passengers still needed space to come and go, so white lines were painted along the length of platforms, between the wall and the platform edge. The shelterers stayed behind the line, leaving room for the passengers until the train stopped running, after which they could spread out over the rest of the platform. Once the electricity to the tracks was turned off, people slept between them, as well as on the stationary escalators. When it came to the tube station at Bethnal Green, though, many of these considerations did not apply, because this station wasn't fully operational during World War II. This station had been built in 1938-9. However, as we can see here, the Underground Heritage Information Plaque explains that it, quote, was designed as part of the ambitious scheme to extend the Central Line from its terminus at Liverpool Street out into North East London. This work was suspended during the Second World War, and Bethnal Green finally opened on the 4th of December 1946. Brian Penn, writing for Historic UK, explains that his mother and her family lived just 5 minutes from Bethnal Green Tube Station and that they regularly sheltered down there. He describes how, quote, "it soon became a subterranean environment with a canteen and library serving residents. People bickered over the best spots, like tourists fighting over a sunbed. Weddings and parties were commonplace as the tube quietly worked its way into people's daily routine. Dinners were half eaten and bodies half washed when the siren went off and everyone bolted for the tube." However, as fate, maybe luck would have it, Penn's maternal family did not choose to make use of the Bethnal Green tube shelter on the evening of the 3rd of March 1943. By this date, Britain was certainly being subjected to far fewer air raids than it had been just a couple of years previously. Nevertheless, I don't think there's any reason to believe that either the authorities or the public were complacent to the potential risk on this date. In fact, if anything, they were likely to be slightly more alert to it at this point, because 2 days previously, on the 1st of March 1943, Allied forces had bombed Berlin. Reprisals were, presumably, expected. Just after 8 p.m. on the 3rd of March, the air raid warning sirens began to sound. Before long, the evening sky was filled by searchlights. The stairs down to Bethnal Green Tube Station were soon busy, as residents of the area mixed with people who had hopped off buses or who had left the nearby cinema and pub. At first, despite there being quite a large number of people, it was, it seems, all fairly orderly and pretty calm. What these people were not expecting was that the authorities would be using, I think perhaps secretly testing, anti-aircraft guns a little over a mile from the station in Victoria Park. Now, my assumption is that what's going on here is a secret test, as frankly, there is no better explanation for these munitions to be used on that night, as there is no evidence of any enemy bombing or even any reports of a single plane flying overhead near Bethnal Green on that night. At the tube station, people had responded to the siren, but they had not and would not hear the expected and familiar sound of enemy planes on the approach. Nor did they or would they hear the whistling drone of bombs as they fell. But they did hear explosions. This, it is suggested, may have caused panic. Returning to Castagnetti and the National Archives, we received the following information, quote, "Witnesses saw a woman with a young child fall near the bottom of the first flight of steps. A man next to her also fell, and with the poor light and the volume of people following behind unaware that someone had fallen, in just a few seconds, around 300 people had fallen on top of each other. Unable to move, many were being crushed." Part of a statement given by an eyewitness named Walter Stedman reads as follows. "Within seconds of these persons falling, other people had fallen on top of them, and they piled up to 3 or 4 high. I could see others being pressed behind. I would say within a minute there was a large number of people piled on top of each other. There was a lot of screaming and shouting, but it was then impossible for any person to extricate himself or herself. I noted one particular incident after the woman and man had fallen. This was when other people began to fall. I saw a big, well-built man who turned and faced up the stairs. I cannot say whether he was struggling to get out or not, but this seemed to cause more pressure, and he was pushed backwards on top of other people who had already fallen. As soon as those in charge learned of this incident, rescue parties were dispatched. They were small at first, but before long, they were larger, more desperate, as the scale of this tragedy became all too clear. Frantic efforts were made to free people from this crush. It would reportedly take 3 hours to free everyone. More than 60 people needed to be treated in hospital. But once everyone was free, a count was taken, and it was discovered that 173 people had died that night. Of that number, 62 were children. In the aftermath of this tragedy, Fear about a dip in morale, or even a growth in distrust for the government, led to multiple factors about this night being obscured for years. Not only did they suppress information about those unexpected and unfamiliar sounds of the anti-aircraft guns, they also kept it quiet that the people who were looking to shelter in Bethnal Green Tube that night may well have been using an unsafe entrance, with no official on duty, poorly lit, unmarked and uneven steps, which lacked a central handrail. And perhaps these people also panicked, and so contributed to this tragedy with their own, I would argue, completely understandable behaviour. Findings from inquiries and legal challenges would, however, reveal much, if not all of this, at the end of the war. In 1993, this small plaque was installed to mark the site of this tragedy. In 2006, the Stairway to Heaven Memorial Trust was founded. After more than a decade of campaigning and fundraising, this finished memorial was unveiled next to the entrance to Bethnal Green Tube Station in December 2017. The names of the victims are recorded upon it. There are also plaques, like this one, placed in the surface of the plinth of this memorial that contain accounts of the event from survivors and also from family members of the victims. I will leave a link to the website for this memorial, as it contains lots of resources for researchers, educators and students. And you will also be able to find details for the annual memorial service, as well as information on how you can help with the maintenance of this memorial and the organisation of these commemorations by donating to the Stairway to Heaven Memorial Trust, if you are willing and able. So, what do you think? Is this disaster one that you were familiar with, or was this the first time you learned of it? Do you have any comments or questions after watching this video? As always, I'm looking forward to reading your conversations in the comment section underneath this video. And the more you put in the comment section, the better, because that will boost the engagement, which should get this video shared out more and thus help to grow our community. You can also find me elsewhere on social media. I will leave links to the place you can find me on the internet in my description box. Please do follow me over on some or all of those so we continue this conversation and start some others. I do hope you enjoyed this video and found it useful. If you did, please share it with your friends. If you like the channel, let some pals know about it. You can tell me this video in particular by hitting the thumbs up. Please do subscribe to the channel, and if you think you are subscribed, now is the ideal time to just make sure that you've not been mysteriously unsubscribed against your will. While you are there, checking, subscribing, maybe resubscribing, please do hit the bell icon that sits beside the subscribe button and then select all in the drop down that will appear, and that way YouTube Play, they will tell you when I've next uploaded, but also when I'm next going to be going live. And I do that now about once a month to talk about the history news. I get sent articles by lots of you lovely friends, and then I put them all together in a slideshow and we go through them. It takes us almost 3 hours. It's a good time. You aren't going to want to miss it. We have, of course, got our failsafe. If you head to my website, I will link it. It is www.katrinamarchant.com. Go to the contact page, you will find this box. Please put your email address in this box and then hit sign up. That will add you to my list so I can send you out an email once a week to let you know what I've been up to, but also to send you useful links to my content for the coming days. I hope you're going to have a great day whatever you're doing, and I look forward to speaking to you all in my next video. Take care of yourselves. Bye-bye for now.